Today I'm going to cover painting gold. Specifically, we're looking at this painting by Rembrandt, this portrait with the beautiful golden helmet. And this is all thanks to one of my patrons, John. So John, thank you for the question and suggestion. He was having trouble figuring out how to paint gold using the Apelles Palette. If you're unaware, the Apelles Palette is just 4 colors: white, black, yellow, red, and all of these colors will be linked in the description. I've covered exactly the materials that I'm using in previous videos, so if you're curious about that, or if you want to buy the same exact colors that I'm using here, feel free to check that out. The same goes for these references. I took this reference here of the Rembrandt portrait, and I actually picked out some particular colors that I think are crucial to creating this kind of balance and to really get that golden shimmer. And so that's what I've got here. These are the colors which I've pulled, and these actually go in order. So I'll show you the annotation. These are going in the exact same order as the annotation, top to bottom, left side, right side, and that will be a useful reference as well. So if you want to print this out so you can try to match the colors as well, feel free to do so. You can, follow along if you so choose. Otherwise, I'm excited for this, so let's just get into it. I've got my palette mixed here. This is how I would mix my palette for some more specific colors. I was just painting before this, so that's why I've already got so much filled out, but I'll show you what is going on here. The first thing, you're gonna hear me talk about this a lot. If you watch my videos, or if you have watched my videos, you probably know what the deal is. I always start out with orange. Orange is like the base for the entire palette. In my view, it is the total life force of this palette. So we've got Old Holland yellow brown. This is Sennelier Chinese red vermilion mixing in. And I'm looking for a sort of chromatic balance here. So just to be aware, if you're using these colors, you're not going to achieve a very nice orange if you put an equal amount of each color. This red, the Chinese red vermilion, is very, very potent. So you need to just hold back a little bit with that one and use more of your yellow. This is the yellow brown. It actually, although it looks kind of like yellow ochre, it's not yellow ochre. Old Holland also makes a yellow ochre. And this can actually create a pretty vibrant yellow. So although it looks maybe a little bit green, a little bit muddy on the palette, this stuff can really pack a punch. So this is basically the base that I'm going to use for pretty much anything, even for gold. I would still probably start with this as a base, because as you're going to soon find out, there is actually a pretty decent amount of orange within this entire painting. Although it might not look like it, it's in there. So this orange is going to be pulled down. As you can see here, it's pulled into the light side, and that's what's really going to serve as the base for all of these nice skin colors. So I'll just move this out of the way in order to show you. So I'll pull that out of the way, pull some orange in here, and I'll come over to the shadow side. Again, I'll kind of scrape this away just so you can see visually what this looks like. But really all that's going on over here is just the mixture of orange together with some black, and that's how you get a nice vibrant brown. It's going to have a lot of chroma, a lot of warmth, and that's going to be some strong stuff right there. So that's very useful. And then I can keep my palette knife a little bit dirty like this. It's okay. It's got a little bit of black. It should be a good amount. In the portrait, we've got some pretty dark skin colors here, and also we've got some darker colors up here in the helmet. So I'm gonna just keep this and mix it into the light side. So that way we've got some darker orange over here, and we can just take a little bit of white, just a little bit of white. I'll put that down, and we'll kind of blend it out here. So this is not going to be like a perfect gradation in terms of the temperature. You see, as it's getting lighter, it's actually going to get cooler because we had that brown in there. So what you can do, you can just take back a little bit of orange here in the middle if you want it to go warmer, and even into the highlight. And then if you want to darken it again, you know, you can decide if you want to add orange. That's going to make it warmer again. Or you just take a little bit of this brown. It's a more subtle way to add back your black. So that will be more similar to the skin tones we're faced with here, since they're quite dark, quite muted. So this right here is going to be useful in some of the face, all of these areas where we have that really dark warm color. I don't know if we're even going to use much of these lighter portions. This will be useful just for the highlights, really. The next consideration is that we have some cooler colors, especially over here in the cheek. You see there's some kind of violets. Right in here we have some kind of dark violets. So that would be something where I would really mix it up for a scenario like this where you need it. I wouldn't keep that on my palette unless I was specifically using it in a painting, just because it's usually not going to come up. And so over here I've got this mixture of my Apelles blue. I call it blue, but it's of course like a gray blue. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? But as far as the Apelles palette goes, this essentially serves as a blue because of the relative contrast. So if you are to put this together with some of your other colors, you can really make it appear very cool. So this is just black and white, self-explanatory. I'm not going to mix that again. This is Mars black and titanium white. So when I mix this out, it's going to have a pretty cool effect. So some people have been confused before about how I'm able to achieve this cool effect. But like I said, Mars black, that's crucial. You're not going to end up with as cool of a color if you're using something like ivory black. And the next color I would prepare, I'm going to put right here. We're going to get some of this orange. We'll put the orange down right here. And we're just going to add some of this blue. I'm going to look for something similar in value. So I'm going for these kind of mid-tones right in here. You see it's not the lighter side. It's not my really dark stuff. But it's pretty similar in value. And I'm going to add this to the orange. And that's going to give me a very useful gray. So this right here is a beauty. And already I can see this is pretty similar to one of the colors. So this is what I'm going to use in order to get something like this. So I can see it's a little bit too warm, so I'll just add a little bit more of my blue. And now we should be getting close, maybe just a touch darker. You can always use gray to tone anything down. If something is too vibrant, if it's too light, too dark, whatever, the gray is just going to help to bring it back towards the middle. So I always keep gray on the palette regardless of what I'm painting. It's just a very useful color. And this mixture here, I don't know if I'm going to use much of this. I might dip into it for my own sake, just because it's here. But basically what I've done is I've just taken my brown. I'll show you here. I've taken my brown like this, and I just added some blue to it, and that's going to give you this type of color. So this might also be quite useful. It's effectively the same as what I just did with this gray. You know, it's just orange plus black and white, so it's all the colors mixing together. But here I've really kind of scaled it out. So if you just add black, you know, you're going to get something like this. So this is going to be your darker value when you don't want it to have so much warmth or so much coolness. If I were to just use the black, or if I were to use the black with a little bit of white, that's going to come across cool. If I were to use my brown with more black chromatically, okay, that's better, but it's going to be in the warm range. So this is just more so in the neutral range. And I think, you know, based on looking at the colors that we're working with here, this should be useful in these darker areas because they're not super warm. Like when I'm looking around here, when I look at the eyes, it's not as much warmth in the shadows as what it typically seems like in Rembrandt. So it's a pretty cool face. So I'm working on a sort of spare canvas here. This is oil ground on top of a cheap canvas, garbage canvas. This is what I use for my preparation. So if you're wondering why there's all of this weird texture here, that's what that is about. Since I'm just doing this kind of quick study, then it's not really worth it to use a better canvas. Maybe in the near future here, I'll put something out using a better canvas and doing a Rembrandt copy. But for this, I thought this was fine. I probably won't continue on this painting after this sort of session. So this is kind of like my sketch for the head. Some of this texture might work fine for the feathers. Otherwise, we got the good stuff here, so that's fine. And I'm just kind of portioning this out, trying to find what's going on with the face. If you'd like to see a video covering proportions and facial structure, things like that, I've got some videos here on YouTube where I actually do cover some of the process that I think is the best. And that's effectively looking at what I call the skull. You're looking at these kind of underlying foundations, and you're using those foundations in order to proportion your figure, and then you're looking at big shapes. So for example, you know, something like this right here, the sort of triangular shape we're always going to find in the cheek. We're going to have the zygomatic bone. We're going to get a highlight here. You know, some of these things you're going to find in pretty much any portrait, male, female, young or old, it doesn't matter. Keep in mind, this is not going to be, you know, strictly for accuracy or trying to make like the perfect copy here. This is mostly a color study, I would say, just hoping to help out John here. John was having some trouble painting gold, so that's what really prompted this video. And if you want to have some videos made in a similar way for anything you're struggling with, then you can feel free to join me on Patreon. On Patreon, I will cover anything really that you're interested in. If you're struggling with something, if I don't already have a video covering it, or if the video doesn't make things clear for you, then I'm happy to really just cover anything you're wondering about or that you need help with. So that will be linked in the description. Otherwise, I think I'm ready to get into some of the colors here. So I'm thinking the first thing I'd like to do here is to just really fill in some space. This is quite a lot of space around the head that is just this light color. That's not going to do me any favors here. So I'm going to mix up some more of this kind of gray color. See, I'm taking the brown plus black and white. Let's get a lot more black in there. This should be fairly similar to the background here. It's kind of like a night motif. It seems like there's like some stars in the background, something like that. So it's slightly on the cooler side, but I still want that brown in there just to temper it a little bit. We'll see how this goes. I just want to get some of this filled in. Now I'm switching to an even bigger brush. We need to get this covered. So these are Da Vinci brushes, by the way. I absolutely love these. These are what I'm always using on a daily basis, especially if I'm working on something big. These bigger ones are really handy. And I love the shape here, so if you're interested, I'll link these in the description. I think they're super handy. That'll give us something to work with. I can cut off some of this junk. Just fill this in. The reason you need to fill in this space in the background is so that you have some more contrast. That's going to help with this dark value back here to just contrast some of the face. It's going to really make the gold stand out. So that's the interesting thing about painting gold. It's not really so much about getting the perfect bright highlight, you know. That's what everybody kind of feels like maybe, and especially in the beginning. If you're a beginner, you know, you're often tricked by these shiny things, right? You're tricked by what seems like the most important part. It's like the highlight, what stands out. But there's actually so much more going on with all of these surroundings, all these midtones, and also the background, the face, which are going to contribute to that vibrancy. So although this is a, you know, pretty highlight and we have all these details, it's actually not as important as getting some of these big shapes and especially the contrasting colors in place. So the next color here that I am interested in is this skin color. I think this will help to cover up some more space. We'll just fill this in a little bit. So this right here, we'll see how this matches up. Right now I can already tell you it's gotta get a little bit more red, a little bit darker, yeah. Okay, maybe for some of this it's better. Let's smooth it out, see if that helps. Yeah, so it's closer to this right here, which is actually in the helmet. So I can pull some of this up here into the helmet, like right in there. That's really the helmet color. It's more of this kind of, it's almost like a sort of ochre type color. But that means we need a little bit more red. So I'm just gonna take a small amount of red here, gonna add this in. Maybe we'll take some of our darker gray just to help darken it up a little bit. See where this puts us. Should be quite a bit closer. When I smooth that out, that's pretty close. Could still go a little bit more red. So just take a little bit more red in there. All right, still needs to go darker. So I'll take just a little bit of my brown here. Now, that's got to be darker, right? It's got to be darker. See how that works. I think that's a match. I think that's pretty much what we're looking for. So let's get some of this on my brush. I'm going to try and just fill some of this in. I'm just going to use some oil as my medium here. You know, this is quite strange. Quite strange how this is shaping out. I don't believe it. I'm going lighter. I think I should just stick to what I know. We have some darker stuff going on in the shadow side over here. This is going to be kind of violet. So I'm going to take some blue, some dark blue. We're going to put that right here. Still go more blue. And then we're going to add some red. And that should get us there. Should be pretty close. Maybe a little bit more black. Let's test this. It's pretty close. I'll just take some more black. And some more red. That should really punch it up. So I'm going to go with that. I know it doesn't look like it matches the paper that well, but I'm pretty sure that's what I need. wouldn't want to go much darker than this. And these colors might not be perfect, but the important thing is just when I do this gold demo. The first task here with filling in the face is really just getting some of this color actually filled in. That was kind of my goal. I ended up spending some more time on it to try to refine some of the features, some of the shapes. I wanted to make sure I was really putting out something which, you know, could work as a painting, even though it's not an exact copy. I wanted to make sure it was still going to work, so that's why I took some more time here than what I anticipated. The kind of challenging part was that these colors were very bizarre. This is not your typical Rembrandt palette. I also did something which was very unusual for my personal practices. I printed out that sort of swatch sheet where I took these colors from the Rembrandt painting, and I tried to match some of those colors. I don't know if that was really worth it, to be honest. I'm not sure if I would recommend it. I don't really know quite yet. Maybe I'd have to try it again with a more ordinary type of Rembrandt palette to be sure. Those base mixtures that I showed in the very beginning are really what I think I would stick to. I don't know if I would try to do all this violet nonsense again. It's kind of weird. It's not really necessarily giving you so much in return for using it. I mean, there's not any great added benefit in my view. You can still achieve a very similar effect, and you can achieve a lot of lively qualities by just using more of your brown and grays, and you can pull in some of those blues if you want to, but I wouldn't make that a strategy per se from the beginning. Especially if you're a beginner, I would stick to a more simple color scheme, something that would be easier to understand, such as, you know, pulling that orange through your light, through your shadow, and then using gray to temper those colors if you need to desaturate, or if you need something to feel a little bit cooler, maybe use that gray instead. As I'm working on this portrait, I'm basically just trying to get everything kind of blocked out. You know, that's really the beginning phase, is just making sure you've got some of the base colors, some of the base structure in place. And that's a pretty typical approach. Normally I would use more solvent in the first layer. I wasn't sure how that would go with this painting. I didn't want to have problems with adherence, since this was meant to be a informative demo. I didn't want to have any kind of problems with that, so I knew if I just use a little bit of oil when I need it and otherwise stay pretty direct, you know, I can always scrape over the paint and just go over this as many times as I want. But typically in the first layer I would use solvent, and that's just going to help to thin out your paint, helps you to cover the space more quick and easy, kind of makes it nice and slick. And then you can use the color of the canvas. I normally use oil ground prepared linen, and it allows you to use that kind of transparency as well to your advantage. Just for your knowledge, that's something I would recommend actually, is number one, having a toned canvas to start with, and then also using solvent in the first layer, and then you can allow it to dry, and in the following layers then you would go with a more direct approach. It also helps to cover the space, so you know, usually I wouldn't be doing anything kind of alla prima like this, and especially with gold, you know, I think you could really build up something beautiful through the layers if you work in many layers. So there's a lot of advantages to actually building it up, allowing for transparency, and not trying to get everything in one go. That's something to be aware of, you know, as I go on with this portrait and with the demo. I wouldn't normally approach a painting in this kind kind of manner. I wouldn't try to finish a painting in one session. I'm actually quite the opposite. I usually spend a lot of time and many layers on a single painting, and that's what I would recommend really, because I think you can achieve a much more lively quality in that way, as opposed to a la primo or trying to, do it all direct in one layer. Something interesting I will point out is that Rembrandt actually does usually have a very nice contrast with his warm and cooler colors. And there's a kind of balance that you're usually going to find where he's got these kind of warm oranges, maybe some yellow or red, and then it's contrasted with cooler accents that are going to be on the light side and the shadow side, but they will be complements to those colors. So for example, if you have your orange, that could be contrasted by something like Apelles blue or maybe just gray. If you have your red, that can be contrasted by a kind of greenish, maybe a cool green, and that's going to help to accentuate the red features. So you might find the green more around the chin or jaw type area, maybe in the shadow somewhere. Those are going to pair very nicely, because usually with Rembrandt you get a lot more of that warmth in the nose, in the cheek, in the eyes. And finally the yellow. The yellow can be contrasted or complemented with a violet. So this is an important topic to keep in mind. As you're painting, you want to know what color you're using, and you should also have an idea about what the complement of that color is. I know this might be getting a little bit particular, but many times you're going to need that skill of kind of picturing the color wheel so you can move quickly and you know how to adjust your colors. Because if you get into a scenario, let's say, where you're using orange and you need to know how to tone it down, you could use gray, and gray will work great, but you also want to know what's necessary in order to bring it even further. So the complement of orange would be blue, and if you mix blue and orange together, you get gray. If you're working with red and you have some kind of red colors that you're placing all around, well, the complement is going to be green. So if you need to tone that down, or if you want to, bring that back in the other direction, then you would have those both handy. So maybe give that some thought the next time you're mixing colors, the next time you're working on your painting. Think about how you can prepare your palette to make these mixtures easier for you as you go. That's why usually I always have orange, I have gray, I have blue. Depending on what I'm working on, I will have those other variations as well. So if I'm going to be using a lot of green, I'll have some green mixed out, and I'll have some violet or some red mixed out as well to complement and contrast with that green. As far as this portrait goes, I'm not sure that there's anything all that interesting to cover here. I thought I would just include it in case anybody was curious, if anybody was interested, you want to see what kind of colors I'm using. But mainly there's 2 or 3 mixtures that I'm dipping into repeatedly. If you have been watching the palette at all, you might have noticed it's mainly going to be that kind of warmer light side color with the creamy orange, and that's going to serve really as the base for all of those warmer areas. So that will be pulled throughout most of the face, and then the other color that I'm using a lot is this kind of gray-brown that I had mixed up in the middle. It's maybe a little bit violet. It's got a little bit more red in it, and that one is very useful for the shadows. So that's filling in most of the shadow side. And then anything highlight related, it's going to be slightly dependent on what area it's in. So if it's on the cheek or on the nose, in these very bright areas, then you're going to have maybe more of your orange, more red, more yellow. Or if it's going to just be a kind of accent, like something along the side of the face, as we see in the cheek, then it might be cooler. You know, if you have some kind of accent that's helping to define the form, then it may appear as a highlight, or it's reading as a highlight, but it's actually kind of in that mid-tone range. And that's something you see with Rembrandt a lot. Along this light side, you're often going to have some kind of complement, which is going to be much cooler. So you're going to have some kind of gray, some kind of Apelles blue type color. And that helps, as I mentioned previously, that helps to bring out those orange colors. Another interesting point is that even in the shadows, you can see the structure, you can see the form. So you find that a lot with the masters, even if they're painting very subtle, even if it's almost blending together, they still have some kind of line or some kind of definition that helps to separate the forms. If you look on the shadow side of the face, what's often going to happen with beginners in particular is that they're going to just blend it straight into the shadows. But that's not how it actually appears. It usually has a little bit of a reflective light, or there's some kind of difference there which allows us to see the definition of the entire form, or in other words, you know, the whole head. You can see the entire head and what that form looks like. So on the light side, there's some kind of contrast with the background, and on the shadow side, there's some kind of contrast with the background. The interesting part is that it doesn't need to be very extreme. You don't need to use high contrast. You don't need to use extremely sharp lines. There just needs to be some kind of separation and some kind of definition. So if you look at Rembrandt's portraits, I encourage you to go and study this and look for what I'm talking about. Look at the shadow side and look at how the volume is defined. In this portrait, we have a good example of this. You can see the cheekbone, you can see the jawline, and all of that is contrasted with the armor and with the background, but it helps us to understand the form. That's what's crucial here. We can actually see what's going on. How is the face bending and moving in space? If you practice that skill, if you practice defining things without needing to have extremely high contrast in order to do so, you're going to be unstoppable. So I encourage you to look into that. With all that said, I hope you learned something from this. We're going to get into the main event now. Now the fun begins. Going to start painting the gold up here. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, the really interesting part, I think, with the gold is that there's not really like a gold color per se. The way that you create the sense of gold is by putting these colors together, putting them side by side, and creating that contrast. The other part is that it's reflective. This is metallic. So part of the illusion in creating this sense that something is metallic is done through the contrast and through your brushwork. So if you look in this reference, you know, we have these very bright highlights that are contrasted pretty sharply by these warmer midtones. And that's what's going to make it feel reflective. There's a high contrast around the highlights. So we'll see what I can do here. Typically when painting gold, I would actually start with a kind of a brown base, and then you can mix in some of these colors as you find it necessary. I just mixed up a little bit more gray right here. You can bring a little bit of brown into this, and this should be somewhat similar to what we're looking for up here. That's pretty close. Could go a little bit darker, so I'll pull some of this black brown. We'll see what that looks like. I think we're pretty much there. We'll just cool it down slightly. So this is almost like a kind of gray that we're finding up here, which is a little bit strange. You might not expect that just based on looking at it. You might think that it should have more color, perhaps, or that something else should be going on. But it seems like this is what's up here. I'll let that carry out a little bit. And the other color here, as I already pointed out, that's kind of like a sort of ochre color. So this is really similar to what I would use in the skin colors. You know, maybe it's slightly more yellow. This will work. But this is basically going to be your orange plus a little bit of black and maybe just a little bit more of the yellow than you might typically find. I don't know if I want to get into all these details. There's quite a lot of details here, but we'll see how this turns out. Now we've got something maybe in between these two. That's going to be this kind of top area. Looks like it's slightly more red. We'll see what that looks like. This should get us pretty close. So this back area is pretty dark here. And this is again, the kind of interesting thing about gold is that really a lot of the effect is going to happen through the contrast. So it's not necessarily like you have to mix up the perfect color. It's more so about how you're going to use them together in order to create this kind of reflective effect. A little tip I'll give here is that if you're mixing your colors and you're trying to kind of find this balance, let's say, and you're trying to figure out what's going on, it's probably a good idea to use your palette knife for a large part of the mixing and to at least give yourself some base mixtures, so that way you're not totally muddying up your brush and creating a mess all over the place. You also want to avoid doing too much mixing on the surface. If you mix a lot on the surface, you're going to really give yourself more challenges than you need to. So you can just avoid that by giving yourself some mixtures on the palette, using your palette knife, and it will just make the process a lot smoother, hopefully. So now I'm using some of this kind of dark gray mixture. We're just getting the outline here, starting to get some shape just under here. So that's going to contrast as well. You see these little subtle reflections in there, which I think we can capture just by using a little bit of this darker mixture. So the only color I haven't mixed yet, which we kind of need here, is the brilliant color. So I'm going to use some of my skin color here. I'm going to add some yellow. That will just tone down the yellow a little bit. And then I'm going to use some white. Let's see what this looks like. This might be too extreme, but this yellow that I'm seeing is not exactly, as bright as you can get. maybe something like this. See what this looks like. That's pretty close. That'll be useful perhaps for the surrounding areas, like these little marks right here. All of those little marks we can use this yellow for, so I can already start to fill in a little bit of this. We'll give some markers here, maybe right there. See this sort of shape. And then in the most vibrant area, we can get a little bit more yellow. And especially more white. And I'm gonna make sure I pull some cleaner white here, since this will be the highlight. So that's more brilliant. So I can use this wherever I see these really bright highlights, like right here. We're going to get some along the edge of the helmet maybe. See that right there? See how that's kind of showing up in a weird way. And the reason is because it actually needs more color. So that's why we got this side mixture here. I can pull some more yellow here, some more orange. So these are the kind of trickier ones to figure out. You might have tried this already and realized something's off about the color, and it's probably just that you need more vibrancy, you need more of that orange and yellow, and that's especially in these mid-tone areas. There's a few mid-tones here where it's really showing up with a high amount of saturation. Some of the other ones are more gray. So you just have to kind of look here, I guess, and see where these little areas are. There's a lot of details in this, but painting gold doesn't have to be so complicated. It can be more straightforward. So this little reflection on the side here, this is going to be helpful as well. That will help to give us the idea that there's like some sheen there, there's some reflection, right? So that's maybe the bigger part of the trick, is just making it feel like there's reflection. And that's really about these kind of value changes. You know, you can make metal, you can make a metallic surface just using black and white. So that tells you it's not just about matching the color. There's something else going on. The big takeaway here is to just make sure you have some variations. Like you want to have some color which is very bright and vibrant, like our true highlight color here. But then you really need to have the midtones, because without the midtones, you're not going to be able to get the proper contrast. And as I keep saying, it's that contrast that's really going to make these colors stand out. So if you don't have some of these midtones around, it just won't really feel right. It will feel maybe like there's a strange coolness, or some other kind of problem. Actually, you could even use brown. Like, watch this. This is my dark brown. I'll get some more space filled in, and then after I fill in some of this back part of the helmet, then I can start to add in some of these more subtle types of reflections. Like down here, there's some pretty subtle reflections that are going to help to define things. So let's just get this filled in. I like this better, using a little bit more brown. I think that looks better. Another tip here is to just, maybe try to keep some things clean. You do need to have some areas where really getting these bright highlights, and those will be very tricky if you're battling with a lot of mud. So this is one of the few times where you do actually want to be more detail oriented, perhaps, and kind of look out for what's happening in different areas and really kind of section it off, even like what I'm doing right here. I'm kind of filling in the space, and then I'm allowing for the highlights here to be more settled, so that I'm not having to battle with my darker colors. Yeah, I guess something kind of difficult to notice here is some of these grays. You know, you're subtly transitioning from something with more vibrancy, and then you're transitioning into more like a muted kind of gray mixture. So that's definitely something challenging. I wouldn't recommend starting with something like this. This helmet is pretty annoying, frankly. I would recommend starting out with something more simple if you're trying to figure out how to paint gold, if you want to play around with it, maybe learn some of these qualities. But these are some very small marks I'm making now. And right here I'm going to pull some pure yellow. I see right up there suddenly some very sharp yellow. So I'm going to pull that in. I'll look around, see if there's anywhere else that I'm noticing something similar since I've got it on my brush. Maybe right along here we could add a couple of those. I'll just kind of peek around here, see what else is around. Anytime you've got a color on your brush, like if I take the time here to get this nice sharp highlight color, I might as well use it up. You know, I might as well look around and see if there's some other place which is going to require that. That's usually a strategy that I use when painting, is pretty much just if it's on my brush, and especially if you're painting something very textural like this, you know, you can move all around and look for that same color, and that's just going to help to fill in the space. And you can focus then on more so looking for that individual color instead of having to like always mix up a brand new color. So if you're painting hair, or you're painting something with a lot of texture, maybe fur is another good example, anything like that, it's usually a good idea because that way you can just move along much more easily. I see some more sharp yellow right up here. This is right at the edge of our light. I'll use a darker brush now to get some gray on here, a little bit of warmth to it. So these little highlights are also going to help when you're going into these areas. You should be pretty concise, I guess, with your brush. You don't want to work around too much. You want to kind of put it in a mark and then leave it. And this is what's going to help in large part to give this reflective quality. It's also going to be very high contrast. So you might find, you know, you're putting something that feels wrong. It feels like it shouldn't go there. And a lot of these highlights kind of come across like that. They're going to be really sharp, and it's going to seem unnatural when you first put it down. But then if you take distance, or if you just give it a little bit of time, it will usually make more sense. If you've never painted something metallic like this before, I think the big challenge is really just knowing what colors you should use, like what kind of mixtures should you have, and then also, I guess, understanding how to approach it. And like I said, you just have to stick to the process, stick to the mixtures, and not get too muddy. That's the real key. When you're painting something reflective, you know, it's a lot of sharp contrast all around. And if you allow things to blend together too much, or if you like approach this as you would approach trying to blend out some soft skin, it's not going to work the same. You're going to run into problems. You have to be more direct and bold, I would say, if you're going to try and paint something metallic. And if you want to get really crazy with your impasto, I mean, there's a few areas where you can do that. So like right here, I can take up some of this white, and I see like right here there's some bold impasto, and I can pull that in there together with my highlight color, and that's going to help to also create some depth here on the surface. So that's kind of like an illusion as well. You can actually use the thickness of the paint to create some of these shadows. I need some pure white right in here. This is a really serious area. So these little touches here should help to really make it stand out. You have to be careful though. You don't want to do this all around. This is only in this very bright highlight area where we're getting the majority of the light. So keep in mind, it's just an effect. It's fun to play around with, but it's just an effect. So you have something that you're trying to do with it. You can't go too crazy, or else it will be ruined, right? There's kind of contrast in all things. Now I can do this sort of fun part here and go through here and give myself some highlights. All these little decorations, whatever these little ornate things are. Just even this sense of rhythm will help to make it feel more realistic. these transitions are also kind of tricky. Anywhere that it's going to go from light into shadow, you know, this is not like your normal type of transition. It's kind of got a weird rhythm, so you gotta check if it's warm or cool. And also, it's usually going to be high contrast. So I keep saying that. You gotta look out for it, because it does make a pretty substantial difference. I'll give myself a little cool highlight right there. I'm gonna go with the cool highlight again. So notice right here, hopefully I can zoom in on this and show you what I'm talking about. I'm gonna go for some cool highlights now. There's a difference between some of these highlights that we're seeing up here. Some of these are pretty sharp yellow, and some of these ones are more cool. It's like a silvery type. It's like a silver type highlight, so I'll try to get that here. Many times the highlights are also going to have a certain kind of depth to them as well. So like there is a gradation, you know, you go from like right here in the center, that's going to be the brightest part, and then it's going to fade a little bit towards the edge, and that can help to sell this illusion. So look out for that. That's often going to be the case. Like you still have a kind of reflection here even, but it's not quite as bright. So we can make it more subtle. Every time I look, it seems like there's a new detail. So that's something also to be careful, to be aware of. If there is so many details like that, you know, you can easily get consumed by it. You can easily just get sucked right into this trap of going from one tiny part to another, and then you lose the big picture. It's more important to get the big picture, to get all these general forms and the right kind of contrast. That's far more important than getting every single detail exactly how it should be, or getting like laser focused into one small area. So that's another reason that I try to kind of move around. Usually if you move around, if you go, you know, as I mentioned with the highlights, if I go from one area and I go quickly with that same exact color, and I can just kind of dance all around and look for any place where I find that color, then I'm not going to get trapped as easily. I'm not going to get sucked into the details of one particular area, and that just makes it easier to keep the big picture in mind, to not get consumed by something very tedious that's actually not very important. It's kind of a difficulty. That's something I always struggled with. When I first started painting, I was super consumed by details. I think the tricky part as well, something that a lot of people will probably get puzzled by, is these colors right here, these kind of midtones. You have to think about the chroma. So this is something I really, really stress when I talk about color mixing and when I talk about using the Apelles palette. You need a sort of process to figure out how to mix these colors. Whatever you're working with, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be pretty much the same process. And the way that I think that goes is pretty much you need to first identify if there's an issue, right? If you're just plodding along and you don't pay attention, well, then you're not going to notice when you're faced with a problem. And then you need to recognize, okay, what exactly is going on? And there's a lot of different ways that that breaks down. But you're going to look at all of these key elements of color. You're going to look at, number one is the value problematic. So the value should be pretty easy to identify if it's a problem. Is it too light or too dark? That's it. That's the only question you need to ask yourself. Okay, so now you need to go in whichever direction on your palette, and you should be aware of that. If it's too light, obviously, you need to make it darker. The next thing you need to identify is the color. There's a few parts to this. You know, color is not so straightforward. So the first part is the temperature. Is what you put down too cool or too warm? If it's too cool, obviously you need to add warmth. With the Apelles palette, that's very simple. You know, you need to go in the orange. If it's too warm and you need to add coolness, you know you need some blue. Maybe you choose gray. That's a more subtle way to change the temperature. The next question is considering basically which direction you need to go on the palette. You know, which color do you need more of or less of? And the easy way to think about that, pretty much if it's going to be warm, you know, you either have yellow or red and that's it. If it's going to be in the cool area, you either need more white or black, pretty much. And the gray is also very useful. The gray is going to be useful for anything which just needs to be neutralized. You know, you can use that to bring it closer towards the middle. But saturation and the actual feeling of the color is important to consider. That's why it's so important when you're mixing that you think about what kind of colors you're actually working with. If you're working with a bunch of yellow, for example, then you know that should be all throughout your painting or all throughout your color scheme. So when I'm working with this helmet, I'm still basically working with my same mixtures that I always have. You know, you saw me mix the skin tones, and I'm basically just adding some yellow to that. You saw me mix these colors here. This is like some more gray-brown, and I'm just adding more yellow to that. So you need to consider what kind of saturation you have. If you're not adding the saturation to the light and to the dark and to the midtones, it's not going to feel the same. So in your highlights, if you add that yellow, that's going to feel different than if you were to just mix orange with white. And the same goes for these shadows, you know. Just because it's in the shadows doesn't mean that these rules don't apply. So considering what you're working with from the very start is actually quite important. This will be sort of the final stretch here. Let's see what we can do. Got a lot of texture up here, so I'm not sure how well this is going to work. Just want some gray Some more gray. There's kind of like a little bit of red in this one area, so I'll mix up some of my orange, pull some red in here. That'll give us the red. There's enough texture here already. I probably don't even have to do that much. So that's pretty close. I don't know if I really want to fool around with that. That's kind of messy business up there. I can add some more, a couple more accents here with my darker color, just to make the helmet feel more complete. I can add some more to the feather as well. I don't know if that really even did anything. I've got all that texture up there, so I might as well just at least get some edges around. I'm just going to pull some of this gray. We're going to make this really subtle. So you'll notice the same thing. If you want to paint silver or anything really metallic, look at this high contrast. We have all this black or these darker colors very, very close to the highlight. So just right here. So that's what really sells it. That's what makes it feel metallic. So that's it for this demo. Like I said, if you want to paint gold, just be careful about not letting your colors get muddy. Pay attention to these midtones. Give yourself some high contrast around the highlights. I think that's basically all the advice that I have. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching and have a great rest of your day.